Over a year into the COVID-19 pandemic, the pressing question remains: when do we return to the classroom and how do we do it? As debates rage across the state of Pennsylvania and the country, school districts everywhere are coming up with solutions for how to return to the classroom safely. John Callahan is the Chief Advocacy Officer for the Pennsylvania School Boards Association, and he joins us today to break down those questions and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. We're over a year into the pandemic and the pressing question remains: should we return to the classroom? And if so, when do we return to the classroom and how do we return to the classroom? It's not quite simply a Democrat versus Republican fight. It is a fight that talks about the mental health of our children, the physical health of our children, protecting them and their teachers against disease, while also trying to find the best path forward to give them a good education. It's full of nuance that's often missed in the sound bites that we see across our screens. And so today we're dedicating this entire show to talking about that very difficult question. And I'm so pleased to be joined by the one man who can do it. John Callahan serves as Chief Advocacy Officer for the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. He joins us right now. John, welcome to Face the Issues.
Well, thank you for having me today.
It's good to have you. And John, before we jump into this, I'll just ask you, how are you and your family doing amid all the craziness of this last year?
Well, it has been one struggle to the next, as everybody else has been experiencing. But hey, we're all kind of moving in this brand new world that we're facing, and I think it's been good. Hey, at this stage, things are much better than they were back in March, right?
That is very true. That is very true. One step at a time is how we get there. John, I want to start by talking, just kind of refreshing this last year, the challenges of COVID-19. Obviously, when last March occurred, schools went virtual. There was really no choice. We didn't know what we're dealing with. We weren't really sure how long it would last. I remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and we didn't know what we were dealing with. But even going virtual proved to be a challenge for some schools in different school districts across the state. What was it like for the school districts that you guys represent? What was that process like?
Well, it was, we feel like we're going way back in time, but it was only basically a year ago, right? So, a year ago, when we first ran into this right head on, school districts were kind of struggling. Everybody was struggling at the time. What do we do? How long is this going to last? How do we protect our students? How do we protect our staff? And when we kind of worked through that, there was a lot of challenges to be faced. Number one challenge was, okay, now we're going to go virtual all of a sudden. And a lot of our school districts already had an online program, but that online program was only built for maybe 100 students at most in many cases. And now they had to go from 100 students to the entire breadth of their student population in maybe one night, which was pretty much impossible. But a lot of school districts were able to do that. And in some school districts, it took longer to actually execute that completely virtual program because of all kinds of different challenges. You had students that didn't have the equipment. Students that didn't have broadband. And to be honest, even now we still struggle with that. We don't have students that have access to broadband right now. We don't have students that have a laptop in their hand. So those problems were kind of the wall we kind of had to get over when we first hit this pandemic and closing and going completely virtual. And that took months, sometimes, 2-month program to kind of get through. I'm happy to say that now, you look at our programs now, much more robust online programs, much more, we've actually, many schools have actually supplied those laptops. So a lot of more students are not having to deal with that issue anymore. And broadband, that's been expanding, but still, I'll leave that open and say that's still a challenge. If you're in any of the school districts, sometimes there's just the spots you can't find any kind of access. And we still have students driving to the local Starbucks to actually connect in to a virtual program, which is just a shame. One of these days, maybe we'll fix the broadband thing.
Right. And one of the other challenges that arise, especially with K through 12, so many of the different school programs and after school programs, and for we talk about the mental health capacity of our students and being with their friends, whether playing a sport or being part of the band, but also in some areas for students who might be in poor communities, this is where they can go after school. These are after school programs that provide them a place to go if they may not be able to go home right away, or they may not have something to go home to. And of course, also the lunch program, and for students who are part of that free lunch program. How was that impacted amid all that happened during this pandemic?
I love it. You've kind of hit the first wall we hit was technology and delivering the curriculum. The second one we hit was those kind of ancillaries, but they're so important, from the sports and the music and the plays and all the other kind of non-curriculum topics that we kind of deliver to our students and guide them through. Those were all impacted. So that was a secondary wave, I guess you could say, of things we had to face. And I'd even go further and say, we had a whole different situations with our English language learners. We had to kind of figure that out. How are we going to translate over Zoom or whatever the connection is? We also had special education. How are we going to deliver special education in a completely virtual environment and make that work? And so many people adjusted to having that happen. And then you even referenced one of the things I'm really proud of, actually, is many people don't realize that schools deliver hundreds of thousands of lunches, meals a day to students across the Commonwealth. That service suddenly was stopped right there when we went completely virtual. And we had to figure out how to deliver meals in the middle of a pandemic in a completely new way. I think even around your neck of the woods, people set up different hotspots or hubs just to deliver those lunches. And I'm really proud of our schools for doing it in a completely different way. But we actually delivered lunches and breakfasts than ever before during the pandemic. So, I guess that's maybe another lesson, is the pandemic did stretch us in this instance with food and lunches and delivering those services, but it stretched us in a good way. And I don't think that's ever going to change. We're going to continue to do it in the new way, where we can deliver that important need to the community in a better, more efficient, and more direct way to kids. So, I guess that's one of the small outcomes of this thing. But yeah, all those different structures that you automatically assume, just the school's going to provide, they all had to switch, and they all had to change, and they all had to improve overnight almost. And that in itself is a feat. I got to thank our administrators and teachers for making that switch incredibly quick, or as quickly as possible. But wow, we are a whole different system than we were a year ago. And I love the fact you brought up the lunches, because delivering all that food was critical to all those students and all those families. And I think almost all our schools really carried through with that. And I'm very proud of that. I think we all should be proud of that.
And to your point, necessity is the parent of innovation. And we saw a lot of innovative ideas. I mean, you've seen the stories. I've seen the stories of teachers that would bring a whiteboard to a kid's house and stand outside the screen door, or would check in, visit, call. You hear about the Zoom get-togethers, and I think they were doing, Zoom hangouts before we were doing Zoom happy hours at our respective companies. And so, John, let me ask you this. PSBA, you represent the 501 school districts across the state, over 4,000 school board members, if I'm not mistaken. This is a very diverse state, politically diverse, but also just in demographic. Pennsylvania's got urban centers such as Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. It has suburban centers where we are here in the Lehigh Valley, and then it has a lot of rural areas as well. Were these challenges different in the different areas, and how difficult did that make your job?
I mean, you're spot on with the fact that, Pennsylvania is so diverse to begin with. And, the challenge there is, that you have to deliver these services in different ways for your community. So really, I mean, the advantage of school boards is that you have a deliberative body that's going to attempt to deliver the education or the curriculum or the services in the way that best meets their community. And that's really what we have is we have these school districts built across the state to really serve their community in very different ways. So you're right. When it came down to Montgomery County versus Pike or Dauphin or wherever, or up by Bethlehem, they're all doing it a little differently. And so necessity is the mother of invention. There were different approaches to all of this. Some schools did stay open, are physically open the entire time, except for the forced shutdown. Other schools have been closed ever since and have been completely virtual. Other schools made the determination that we can actually be open Monday, Tuesday, and maybe Wednesday we're closed, and then Thursday, Friday we're open. Maybe half of the student body comes in because we don't have enough room to spread students out in order to meet COVID guidelines. So depending on your local situation, each school board, each administration had to make those determinations, those nuances. And it did put school boards in a very difficult position, a position that, the state said, here's the guidance, but you as the locals make the decision, which we would prefer. But at the same time, very difficult position for school boards who aren't, we're not medical doctors. We're not experts in viruses, we had to make those decisions. I think, the men and women who serve their community really tried their best to make the best decision, the best decision they could with the circumstances. And it continues to change and modify. But not an easy situation that we were put into. But I think overall we're performing pretty darn well.
Certainly a thankless job sometimes being on the school board, but one of the most important. John, I appreciate that insight. When we come back, I want to talk about what it looks like, especially now heading into the next academic year, what that would look like, potential changes for these different school districts. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. John Callahan, the Chief Advocacy Officer of the PSBA, is with us. John, thank you again for taking the time, and of course for all the work that you do on this incredibly important issue anytime, but especially here amid the pandemic. John, I want to shift the conversation to something you had said when we went to break about schools coming back and how different schools in our state, very large and diverse state, different schools have taken different approaches to it. The reopening debate is very heated. It is being debated across the country. It has, like every other issue in our country, taken up political sides with a lot of political rhetoric. What has been the PSBA's position on this?
Well, first off, everybody wants our students, our children to be back physically in the building. So I want to kind of say that, from our position as a school board association representing all these diverse interests across the state, we want that to be a local decision, because this kind of decision is not something that you can say, across the state, oh, you're all going to be open, or you're all going to be virtual, or you're all going to be hybrid, whatever it is. It's all very much a local, prognosis. So you're going to, or I should say a diagnosis. You're going to take a look at your community. You're going to figure out, what's the spread? What's the size of our buildings? And how do we have to modify things to make sure our students are safe? How many students do we have? How large is our district? How small is our district? There's all kinds of different factors that go into it. And when you're taking all those factors together, you're going to come up with a different solution in almost every community, as we're seeing right now. Like I said before the break, we have some schools that have been open, quote unquote, open physically this entire time, this entire school year. And that's because their community and the shape and all those other factors kind of played into it. They said, you know what, we can do this safely, and this is how we're going to do it. Whereas other school districts looked at it and said, you know what, our building size, for instance, doesn't fit enough students in here. We're not built for having this many students, so we need to space them out. And the best way to do that is have half of our school district in for Monday and Tuesday, and the rest in for Wednesday and Thursday, and then Friday we're all virtual. School districts have approached this in so many different ways. I got to say right now, though, that most of our schools are heading back out of those those virtual environments to maybe a hybrid, or maybe they're taking the hybrid environment and they're switching that to a in-person environment completely, or maybe even they're doing that kind of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday environment, and then Friday's virtual. So I think you're starting to see that entire transition. I've been seeing that all across the state, is that we've been slowly moving to being completely in-person education. Because, I mean, the other outcome is, although we're doing virtual and it works for some students, it is also not the greatest for other students. So I think, getting students back in the classroom is certainly going to improve our ability to educate.
John, you mentioned the challenges with online school. You said this is why everybody wants to be back. And certainly, I think that there's agreement on that. Whether teacher unions or teachers or parents, there tends to be agreement that we would love to be back. The question is, how do we do that, and can we do that right now? So obviously, we know the challenges of virtual school. We talked about the mental health capacity. We talked about the extracurricular issues that come up with virtual school. The return to campus bit, you mentioned earlier some challenges, such as, can the school follow CDC guidelines given the size of the school, how many students you have, and so forth? Is that the biggest challenge to the reopening, the idea of the pandemic, the COVID-19 numbers still versus CDC guidelines, or what are the other challenges that these districts that are facing as they try to come back in person?
You have both the CDC guidelines, and then you also have the state guidelines, which pretty much match up with each other. And they are all about the COVID and how it spreads in your community and how much spread and how you can mitigate that within your school building. And also how if you are in person, what happens when you have an infection and how much of that you can sustain within a building. And then what you have to do in that case. It's all based on the virus itself, and protecting students. So overall, I mean, that's the main concern and that's the main challenge. And it is, again, putting those pieces together, those different factors, from your building size, how far apart your students can be, what's the best thing for your community versus the spread, about how many students you can have in the building at the same time and how that works. I got to say, it's all driven by the virus itself.
And some of the different plans that we've seen, and these plans are listed on PSBA's website, different school districts coming in with different ideas. Some are doing the full reopen, as you mentioned. Some are still fully online. A number of schools has done the hybrid version. Some schools are doing almost a choice where students can decide if they're going to come in. There's a limited number of students that can come in, but students are given that choice if they want to come in or if they want to stay at home. Others have done something called tiered reopening. Is there one that works better than the others? What have you, you've seen all 501 school districts that work here. What's worked, what's not worked, what's been rethought?
I wish there was one that worked, that was just the winner, because then that would just be wonderful, because then you could just have an answer. There's no golden, or what is it, a silver bullet. There's no one answer to this. They've all just been applied to the communities and seem to be working. And you're right. A lot of them are tearing themselves back. You'll hear in the papers, hey, X school district has made a commitment that on such and such a date, they're going to be in almost full time. And, they build up to it. Maybe they're able to execute it. Maybe they execute it for 3 or 4 days. Then maybe they're off because they have an infection that happens in the school, and then they're back in. I think overall people are moving that way, just over a trend across the state. But it's, again, all based upon your local decisions. One thing I want to say, though, is during this pandemic, we have learned so much about virtual education and having such a large student body participate in that. I don't think these things all go away in the future, because some of our students do succeed on virtual education platforms. Some obviously do not. I think in the future of education, we're going to see many different things next year. A lot of our schools are even starting to discuss what are they doing next year when it comes to education and providing that curriculum to the students. And there are certainly just a whole host of different ideas on how to deliver curriculum that we've never done before. And I think that actually is another example of a positive thing that came out of this pandemic is curriculum in Pennsylvania is going to be delivered way differently. And I think that is going to benefit the students at the end of the day. And it's an outcome of this. It forced us to do things way differently. And we've seen some of it work. We've seen some of it not work. We're going to stick with what works best for students.
Yeah, one of the silver linings of the pandemic. John, one of the things that everyone's talking about is the vaccine. Obviously, there was talk about using the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for teachers before that was put on pause. The hope, what is your hope? What is your organization's hope as far as vaccines go? Is this a hope that all faculty and school employees are able to get vaccinated? Are you encouraging schools to have teachers vaccinated before they come back in the fall? What's the position and what's the hope?
Well, a few months back, at one point, we weren't prioritized. Teachers weren't able to, be prioritized in the list of vaccines. We really pushed hard, along with some of our other, pro-education colleagues, to get that done. And the Johnson & Johnson shots were executed, and we had a lot of students, a lot of teachers that actually were vaccinated at the time. Our teacher staff or our administrative staff, a lot of them are vaccinated, and we would hope that we could continue down that line. Now, you can't mandate that they're going to be vaccinated, but you can offer it and make sure that that's there. And I think a lot of our administrators and our teachers certainly did take advantage of that to protect themselves and hopefully protect their students in the future. So we're seeing that trend across the state, and I think it's a good trend.
John, I have to ask this on behalf of students all across the state. One of the concerns that we hear all the time is now that we've gone virtual, there will be no more snow days. Do you have a response to that?
Not true. Sorry, student. Sorry. I don't know who to say sorry to. The parents, maybe. I think, and we've seen it. We saw it this year. Some of our schools who were virtual said, you know what? Our students just need a snow day today, and we're going to do it. And some did not. It just was, up to the local community. So, some of our schools still had a snow day when it was snowing, even though they were completely virtual. So I don't think they're going away. And sometimes, I think they're just completely needed. Personally, from a parent view, and I, as a kid, as a man who's young at heart, a snow day is always worth it.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. John Callahan, thank you for being with us. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. John, thank you again for your time and for the work that you do. I want to close out by asking you something that is perhaps not at the forefront when we talk about reopening, being that health and our well-being is always at the forefront. But it's still nonetheless very important. And a lot of educators are concerned about learning regression among students, that even with virtual school, with all the mental health capacity components and everything else, that our students have regressed in some ways. And schools will have to address that. Is that a reality? And if so, what do you think the biggest challenge for our schools is, and how should they go about addressing it?
That is a reality, certainly a reality that we're all dealing with. And I've got so many administrators across the state and school board members working on that now. And they're going to be, again, handling it on a very case-by-case basis. We've got summer camps being built just about catching students up. We maybe have some extended school year dealing with these issues. All kinds of resources are being pulled into dealing with the academic slide or academic regression that we face. And it's going to be around for quite a bit. So this is just the beginning of trying to address that issue. And it's just going to be a struggle for maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years.
And you say 2, 3, or 4 years. That's someone's high school career right there. And obviously, the older we are, and I teach at the community college myself, there's ways that we can catch them up faster. And when you're younger and you're learning building blocks of math and reading and so on, that could be very difficult. And if we're taking a few years, this is half of someone's elementary school career or their high school career. How optimistic are you that we're going to be able to do that and get these students ready for that next level when they're coming out?
This is certainly the next challenge, and we could talk hours on it, but I think I'm optimistic about it. But it is a huge challenge for school districts and for parents and for our students, from young to the high school kids. different challenges all there, but our school districts are very aware of it, and we're making the plans and we're making the investments that need to be done in order to actually address the slide that we've experienced. Everybody's been through it, and we've got to direct our resources to our students. That's really what's going to happen at the end of the day. And I would say, even right now, if you attend school board meetings or you're involved in your school district, being discussed right now. How are we starting to deal with it? How are we as a school district going to face this problem head on? And each district is facing it in a whole different way with all kinds of different ideas. So I think you're going to see a lot more innovation there too to address academic regression.
Well, I think that's a great point, and a reminder that returning to normal is still just not just the end of everything, and we still have a lot of work ahead of us. John Callahan, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for the work that you do, and our best wishes to you and your family, your colleagues, as you continue to tackle these challenges.
Thank you.
That is all the time that we have for tonight. I want to thank John Callahan for joining us, and of course, thanks to you, the viewers, for joining in. Tune in again next week. Until then, my name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.